The seed sovereignty meter starts with the study of the Andean grain of quinoa as a seed, as a meal, and as an interscalar vehicle that passages through time and space to reveal the distinct mechanism of extraction that governs the way in which we consume our food today. To measure is to make the abstract tangible. Just as the gram materializes the concept of mass, the meter the concept of distance, the minute the concept of time, the Richter scale the magnitude of an earthquake, just as the whole life carbon assessment uses carbon as the common denominator to quantify the impact of a building on the environment, the seed sovereignty meter follows the seed from the field to the plate, measuring and mapping the impact of each input, output, and process to ecological, economical, and socio-political effects. Colonization to neoliberalism, the extractive ideology uses the rhetoric of different eras to dominate global food supply system and its surrounding discourse to abstract and profit off fragments that fit the narrative and erase everything that doesn't. Though issues rooting in the contemporary food regime are plenty, the SSM seeks to eliminate abstraction because it is the abstraction that enables the dissociation, delineation, and dehumanization through which the extraction of value from the land, the people, and the seed is orchestrated down to the perfect assembly line. The SSM involves measuring, recording, and mapping the impact of every input, output, and process that the seed is subjected to in its journey from the field to the plate. The result of this mapping exercise is to ascertain and quantify the multiscalar consequences of our contemporary supply chains and how a combination of different spatial practices spread across different parts of the world collectively and unknowingly work to help maintain the status quo, and in doing so compromise the sovereignty of the seed, the land, and the people, and the ecosystems that sustain it all. The seed sovereignty meter is inserted at various nodes that not only constitute the contemporary food dynasty, but the optimization of which can dismantle it. Let us observe the SSM operating at these critical nodes. Here is the route of the traveling food festival in Bolivia that passages through local markets frequented by Quechua or Aymara small farmers, indigenous to the Andes. Here, the seed sovereignty meter undertaking is incentivized to the farmer through the distribution of culturally significant food, recipe cards, and free exchange of seeds. I assist small farmer Nina to record all the inputs, outputs, and processes involved in her cultivation of quinoa, the analysis and mapping of which reveals that Nina's use of company-bought seeds is freezing the natural evolution of the seed, making it more susceptible to pests and degrading climatic conditions. And the high premiums on the seeds and manure package means she will always remain in debt. Her organic certification specifications are forcing her farm into a monoculture that is deteriorating the soil ecosystem at an exponential rate. To top it off, given the quantity of quinoa she produces, she can barely manage the debt on the seeds and realizes the end retailer makes as much as 12 times the price she is forced to sell her produce at to the local processing monopoly, due to which she also loses out on the traditional post-harvest byproducts such as saponin that functions like a biopesticide for the crops. Accessing the archive of spatial practices, she is able to compare her practices with that of a nearby Ainoka and realizes how her and others' individual quinoa cultivation practices have corrupted the cultural philosophy of her people over time. Having witnessed several land conflicts erupting in her village, in addition to the shortage of llama manure, the herding of which is increasingly abandoned with the demand for more quinoa. She is now able to grasp her position in a system that is designed to disadvantage her and decides that the long-term ecological deterioration and the cultural adversities mapped on multiple scales trumps the short-lived economical gain for her. Nina receives a membership card as a newly registered farmer on the Sovereign Seed Network, which grants her access to a knowledge network of local people to collaborate with. Accessing the archive once again, she takes time to understand and reconnect with all the different spatial practices in an Ainoka, rooted in the philosophy of Aini or cosmic reciprocity, and works with local farmers within the Sovereign Seed Network to rectify her practices for a better outcome on the SSM. Working with labor unions such as the Union of Shop, Distributive, and Allied Workers, the SSM is able to ingress the warehouse and with that the vast sources of seeds and data that move through them every day. Our point of contact in the Tesco warehouse in Reading, Clive encourages his fellow workers to take the seed sovereignty meter assessment online, as well as putting up posters in the workers' break rooms. Taking the assessment himself, Clive is able to visualize the position and footprint of his warehouse among the giant chain of supply of quinoa and the significance of his labor in preserving the assembly line. Through the input of information on his KPI, manual plus mechanical labor, employment contracts, and so on, he is able to quantify and compare his labor conditions to others documented within the SSM archive. For instance, the key performance indicator figure used to measure the productivity of workers at hourly, daily, or monthly intervals is set at an unreasonably high hourly standard for mostly manual labor at the Reading warehouse, which is detrimental to both their physical and mental well-being. He is additionally then able to compare all of their wages to the amount of profit they make the warehouse annually, and the discrepancy in the compensation. By the comparisons presented to him by the SSM, he can either choose to move to a better rated warehouse or unionize with his colleagues to demand the lowering of KPIs and or reparations accordingly. In the city, the last locus of the supply chain assembly line becomes the first node of infiltration to reach the eaters, their supermarkets. Paresh, a Tesco Metro employee and a member of the USDAW, ensures all the quinoa products received from the Reading warehouse have an SSM rating sticker, which allows us as eaters to interact with the SSM simply by reacting to the rating. Following the barcode alongside the sticker allows us to see the seed's impact and journey, allowing us to contextualize our purchases and question our relationship with the seed. The M&S superfood salad, for instance, is the manifestation of our apathy as crazed consumers and our need to fetishize food as the trends allow it. Among all the 7 internationally sourced ingredients of the salad, quinoa farmers in Bolivia sell every last bag for profit in order to remain lead exporters of the superfood. Economic poverty is traded here for one of nutrition. Ironically, 2013, the same year as UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, declared as the International Year of Quinoa for its potential in ending world hunger, Bolivia saw some of the highest counts of malnutrition, with up to 2/3 of their children suffering from anemia. Other nodes of intervention include restaurants and urban farms. Merve and other activists at the Hackney City Farm, for instance, host a variety of educational programs for children and adults, promoting food literacy and backyard farming via school programs and summer workshops. The SSM serves here as a tool, exercise to map and compare the economics and nutrition of the homegrown versus the store-bought seed. Critical in food deserts where the deprivation of income, knowledge, and nutrition is used to profit off the most vulnerable. Over time, the data gathered, the archive of practices built, and the impacts assessed by the SSM could serve as evidence to challenge trade agreements or patents and facilitate legal proceedings where the rights of the seed and its associated people are under threat. For instance, the US-based Apilava patent of 1994 was applied on a variety of quinoa indigenous to a village in Bolivia. The application was challenged as the properties of the variety were claimed to be of local knowledge by the Bolivians. Had it been accepted, the patent would also subsume 43 other varieties of quinoa, affecting exports to markets abroad and local production in Bolivia. Though this case of biopiracy was avoided, several such patents on life have led to the commodification and consequent seizure of previously free flow of indigenous seeds among indigenous people. The map drawing also traces the fragmentation of local ecosystems, the reduction of life to its genetic strands, and the weaponization of biotechnology, trade agreements, and patent laws to disenfranchise the labor of an indigenous people in domesticating the seed. Seed's historical and cultural links, traced and archived in the SSM database, can also pose a case for protecting the sovereignty of the seed and seek reparations for where it, or its people, or its land may have suffered. Legal ally and La Via Campesino activist Javier works to prepare the native seed bill, based on research and mapping that shows the eco-cultural links between the quinoa seed, the llama, the indigenous people, and the land through the course of history, until severed by the Spanish conquest, working to prove how the indigeneity of quinoa is intertwined with the Andean people. SSM can thus be a tool for painting the bigger picture, not limited to solely the economic impact of a seed, but its intrinsic cultural and ecological value, thus prompting a shift in the way we value and relate to food as producers and consumers of the seed. With an increasing number of growers, supply chain workers, and eaters engaging with the SSM, a reimagination of a seed sovereign world sees farmers like Nina save and exchange seeds, include llama herding back on their farm, and live debt free. Tired of being tired, Sarah unionizes and protests to lower her KPI and succeeds in addition to getting a raise. She eventually quits. With a history of diabetes in her family, Mani is able to make better food choices and now sources all of her produce from a nearby urban farm. Working as a tool of measurement, recording quantities of inputs and outputs, the time and nature of associated processes, the SSM seeks to materialize the injustices and slow violence experienced by real bodies in real systems around the world, with the goal of providing a new way of grasping the abstract, and in doing so, restore self-determination, control, and autonomy to eaters and growers alike. The SSM's inherent unit is sovereignty, and it seeks to power our collective capacity to foster sovereignties, so that we may cultivate a sovereign earth.